So we've done the simple function, now let's try a more complex function. Let's make a function that counts the e's in a user-entered phrase. We will combine the built-in functions of level 5 with our declared function of level 6. Let's call our function countE, and in this particular function, we'll have no parameters. That often happens in JavaScript code. The first thing we'll do in our function is we'll ask the user for a phrase to check. And then, if that particular entry is invalid, the first thing we'll do is alert the user, and then we would exit the function with a failure report. As you know, we'll exit the function by using the return keyword. Otherwise, if the entry is valid, we'll go ahead and start counting the e's inside the user's phrase. The first thing we'll do is we'll make a counter variable for the e's. Then we'll have a for loop that goes over each character in the user's entry. If that particular character is a capital E or an E, we will increment our E counter variable. Finally, we'll alert the amount of e's in the phrase and return a success from the function. Okay, so let's start coding. We'll establish a variable called phrase, and we'll assign to that the results of a prompt function that asks, which phrase would you like to examine? Then, if that entry is valid, we will know it because the phrase variable is a string. So we say if the type of the phrase is not a string, we will alert to the user that that's not a valid entry, and then return a false, which will instantly exit the function. Our otherwise becomes an else, which is where we will actually count the e's. So first of all, we'll establish a variable called eCount that gets set to the value 0, because we don't know how many e's are in our phrase. Then we'll make a for loop, which will start at the very first index of the phrase, proceed all the way through all the characters of the phrase, incrementing the index through each loop. Inside the loop, we'll have a complex conditional, remember those? Where we check to see if the character at the current index we're looking at is either a lowercase e or whether that character is a capital E. And if that is true, if we get a truth value out of that complex conditional, we'll go ahead and increase the eCount variable. Once that loop is entirely complete, we will have in our hands the amount of e's in that phrase. And we can tell the user with an alert method there are, however many, e's in that phrase. Then we can return true, which will instantly exit the function. So let's see this in action. So now if we were to call our countE function, notice with no parameters, we would get a small pop-up window from our website that says which phrase would you like to examine. So let's do excellent elephants, which has a few e's in it, as you can see. Once we've entered that phrase, the countE function will proceed, and we will find that there are 5 e's in excellent elephants. Now let's take a little bit closer look at how that works internally. So if we want to trace our e counter, we know that we're going to start at index 0. The first thing that will happen is that we check whether the index is less than the length to make sure that we don't go over the edge of the string. For index 0, of course that's true, and the character at that index is a capital E. So when we ask the question, is the character at that index a capital E or a lowercase e, we get a truth value from our complex conditional, and so our e count is instantly turned to 1. As the loop continues, this procedure will occur for every character, including spaces and punctuation. And when we finally get to the index that is just past the end of the string, we'll get a false value from the loop condition and stop the loop. The function will instantly return an e count of 5. So now that we've tackled a more complex function, we will wrap up our function level with an examination of local and global scope inside JavaScript. Let's say we've got a program, and the program has some variables, and it also has a couple functions. You can see our variables are x and y, and our functions are add and lower, subtract. Now out here in this space, in the main program, the scope is called global, which means that variables declared there are potentially accessible from any place, even within the functions below. Inside the functions, the scope is called local, and all of the variables that are declared inside the functions are only contained within those functions. You can think of global and local scope as being like the global planet Earth having many nations, and within each of the nations they have their own government and their own way of doing things. An important thing to know about functions is that they will always create a new local scope. The variables that are declared inside of a function will stay in that function. So let's take a look at this tiny snippet of code here, where we outside the function declare a variable and set it equal to 6. But then, inside a new function add, we rename a new variable x and set it equal to the parameters a plus b. So you can see that I've got a variable keyword on that x. When that happens in a local scope, an entirely new variable is created with the name x that is only accessible to the function block for add. So here you can see that if we called the add function and passed in the values 9 and 2, add itself would return 11, but then if we logged out the variable x, we would still get 6. And that's because the internal variable x that got set equal to a plus b did not modify the variable that's on the outside of the function. In JavaScript, however, we need to be careful, because if we don't declare the variable x, JavaScript thinks that you mean the global variable on the outside of the function. So you can see in this second snippet of code that we've still got our variable x declared outside the function, but inside we no longer have declared a new variable x and instead just used the name x. So you can see here that if we actually called the add function this time with 9 and 2, yes, the add function would return 11, but when we log out the x variable, its value has been changed to 11. It's always important to declare your variables carefully and know the relationship between the local and global scopes in JavaScript. So coming back to our earlier program, if our program had the variables x and y and the functions add and subtract, we know that the add function would create its own local scope with the parameters a, which is local to the function, and b, which is also local to the function. Then inside that add function, we would have a variable called x that would be local as well to the function. Now take a look at the subtract function. It also has local parameters a and b, but when it uses the variable y, it is the global variable y that it modifies. How can we tell that in the code? There is no variable keyword next to the y inside of subtract. Now we release you to the challenges. See you back for the last level. JavaScript road trippers, you are here. We'll wrap up our function level. Oh, O's. Look at that horrible on the bottom.